Good Tuesday morning, Mount Olive Church family and friends. Hope everybody's having a great start to the week. I'm behind. I've got to get my screen pulled up here. Um, Hope you got to be with us Sunday morning for Pastor's message that the Lord gave him and talking about sufficient grace. I want to touch on that. And Pastor talked about, get my screen pulled up. I'm sorry, I'm behind here before I pushed record. Pastor talked about in his devotion Monday the power inside, so I hope you got to watch that. Sufficient grace, and we're going to go to Second Corinthians, the background scripture here in just a minute, and I'm going to use that Second Corinthians 12 scripture as well. That's what the pastor talked about, but there was a point in the first part of that, in the first part of the background Sunday morning when he made the statement that when God says no. And so that really stuck with me. I wrote that down. Paul had prayed and told God he had this issue that had bothered him, and he prayed 3 times about it. And, eventually God said, no, but my grace is sufficient. So let's look at that. It says for this is 2 Corinthians 12, 8 and 9 says, for this thing I besought the Lord thrice, or 3 times, that it might depart from me. So he had this issue, and how many times have we faced that battle or that storm? We've got that thorn in our flesh, something that, we seek God for, and we seek him time and time again. And, how do we respond? How do we respond when God says yes? And we know that that's the easy answer, but how do we respond when God says no? That stuck to me. I'll tell you here more in just a second, but verse 9, it says, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. When at your weakest moments is when my strength shines through. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, Paul said, that the power of Christ may rest upon me, the power of Christ. And so Pastor talked a little bit about that too with point number 3 and talking about the what of grace. As he was talking about the widow, right? The widow named Grace. And he was talking about that. And he said this in point number 3, the what of grace. So when God says no, that stuck with me. I don't know. Some of y'all may remember a young man that came to our church several years ago, Inky Johnson. He played football at Tennessee, and he was injured on a play, and he's bound for the NFL. He's going to be a first-round draft pick, make millions and millions of dollars, and he goes through a tackle, and he hurts his shoulder, and he's paralyzed his whole right arm. He almost dies that night from a ruptured artery, and he never plays football again. He's got this about a 9-10 minute clip on YouTube. I actually went back and watched it after Sunday's message that the pastor had, and because I think it's titled the same thing, when God says no. That really stuck with me when he said that Sunday morning. So I went back and watched it. He's got a quote in there that I really like, and I couldn't remember what it was, but I put it on the screen here, and it says, in life, some people don't need you to preach a sermon. They need you to live one. And sometimes when God says no, you're about to live that sermon. When God says no, we have to trust that God's grace is abundant. It is adequate, and it is ample enough. And so with point number 3, Sunday, the pastor, one of the very first points that he made with the what of grace, he said God's power to provide the needs of his people. God's power, and he touched on several things, talking about the answer to the sin's consequences and obedient faith. But it made me think of this, and I wrote this one down. It says God's grace has the power to bring peace. And I've shared this story. If you've been with Mount Olive Church, if you're a Mount Olive lifer, like I say sometimes, or if you've been with us several years, you've heard me share the story of being in Memphis with Lauren, and when she was young and fighting her cancer. There was a point when she went through her bone marrow transplant that, and yeah, I've shared this before, but I'm going to share it again. Okay. So just listen. But, there's a point where she was going to have radiation after her bone marrow transplant. And it was the last step, 2 weeks radiation, you're out here, you're going home. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, God, just thank you. This is it. Let this be the end of the road. We're done. And the day after they do the scans for the radiation doctor to know where to exactly place the radiation, they called us and met with us and said, there's too much tumor there. Radiation's not going to work. We're going to have to see if we can't do surgery again. So, Paul prayed 3 times, sought the Lord 3 times. I think I was praying, for the 2 years leading up to this, I was praying 3 times an hour maybe for God to move us out of this situation. And God had guided us, and God had blessed us, and God had took care of me, and God had gave us strength. And there were good days and there were hard days. But God's grace never failed. It was abundant, and it was adequate, and it was ample enough. But this one particular time, I really got down, because I knew what we were facing was going to be tough. It was one of the hardest things maybe since the start of the journey with Lauren, and that was facing another surgery. And the surgeon said, we don't know if she's going to make it through this one or not. And later on that night, and this is the part of the story that I've shared before, but I heard someone outside at Memphis, a woman and her young daughter was going home the next day, was healed, and was being released and going home cancer-free. And she stood outside and she was cursing God and taking God's name in vain. And I got really upset. Not at her. I was brokenhearted for her for a few minutes, but I was really upset with God. And I said, that's it. And I stormed off, walking up the steps. And I was just giving it to God all the way up the steps. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I've trusted you. I've served you. I'm trying to live for you. And this is the answer I get. And it's no. And I'm done. And so as I go upstairs, I'm just so brokenhearted. I didn't know if I could go another day. I really didn't. And God spoke to me in that moment, and God's grace done this. And God's grace spoke to me, and it says, yeah, but I have give you a peace that lady has never found. And at that very moment, God's grace put a peace over me, and I could stay in this devotion, for the rest of your day, and I could never explain it to you. I could never explain to you the peace that God gave me that night, to lay my head down and know that, okay, if this is what you want, God, I've trusted in you for the past couple of years. I've put my faith in you, and I'm not going to quit now. And God's grace brought a peace over me. It has the power to bring a peace over us in the hardest of situations. If you're going through something today, trust in God's grace. It is abundant, it is adequate, and it is ample enough to lead you through. Hope that gives you all a little something to think on today. God bless you. I love you. Hope everybody has a great day. Remember to pray for me. And as always, I'm praying for you. God bless.